Victor's hands trembled as he jammed the golden key into the lock of his $5 million mansion, the key that had opened this door 1,000 times before. But today, on this sweltering Tuesday afternoon at precisely 2:15, the lock refused to turn. He twisted harder, his knuckles white, sweat running down his temples despite the air-conditioned luxury that should have been waiting on the other side. The key scraped against metal that suddenly felt foreign, hostile. He yanked it out and tried again, his breath coming faster now, his eyes darting to the empty street behind him where any moment a black SUV might appear. He needed to get inside. He needed to get to the safe. He needed to disappear before they found him. The door remained closed. Victor pounded his fist against the imported mahogany once, twice, 3 times, the sound echoing across the manicured lawns of Riverside Heights, where every house cost more than most people would earn in 10 lifetimes. The door opened, but only a crack, maybe 4 inches wide, and through that narrow gap appeared a face he had seen every day for the past decade, but had never really looked at. Rosa stood there, in her crisp gray uniform, her dark eyes meeting his with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between sadness and resolve. He expected her to swing the door open immediately, to step aside with that deferential nod she always gave him, but she didn't move. She stood blocking the entrance to his own home, her small frame somehow filling the entire doorway. Victor felt his face flush hot with rage and confusion. "Did you change the locks, you incompetent woman? Open this door right now. I need to get to my office." His voice came out louder than he intended, nearly a shout, but Rosa didn't flinch. She looked at him with those same quiet eyes and said in a voice so soft he had to lean forward to hear it, "You cannot come in, Mr. Victor." The words hit him like cold water. "What did you say?"
"Get out of my way." He pushed forward, but she held the door firm, her small hands somehow immovable against his weight. "Sir, you are trespassing on private property. Please leave before they see you." Trespassing? Had this woman lost her mind? This was his house, his property, his kingdom that he had built with his own brilliance and ambition. "Rosa, I'm warning you. Step aside or you're fired, and I'll have you arrested for obstructing me." But even as he said it, even as he tried to summon the authority that had once made entire boardrooms fall silent, something in her eyes told him that the words that used to work like magic had lost their power. Victor Vance had been called many things over his 15-year career on Wall Street. A genius, a visionary, a wizard who could turn 20 million into 200 million with a single trade. He had been featured in Forbes, interviewed on CNBC, invited to speak at conferences where people paid $5,000 just to hear him explain his investment philosophy. His firm, Vance Capital Management, controlled over $3 billion in assets, and his personal fortune had reached heights that made him feel invincible, untouchable, like a man who had solved the puzzle of life that everyone else was still struggling with. He owned homes in 4 cities, drove cars that cost more than houses, wore watches that could feed families for years. And he had built all of it, or so he told himself every morning in the mirror, through pure intelligence and ruthless efficiency. The truth that was currently being discovered by federal investigators and furious investors and journalists who smelled blood in the water, was that Victor Vance had been running one of the most elaborate Ponzi schemes in recent history. For 7 years, he had been paying old investors with new investors' money, generating fake statements, fabricating returns, building a tower of lies that reached so high he had started to believe it was real.
But 3 days ago, the tower had started to crumble. A large investor had demanded a full withdrawal, then another, then 10 more, and suddenly, Victor didn't have the money he claimed to have. The auditors were coming, the FBI was asking questions, and Victor, who had always been so good at talking his way out of problems, knew that this time, talking wouldn't be enough. That's why he had come home at 2 in the afternoon instead of his usual 8 in the evening. That's why he was sweating and paranoid and desperate. Inside his home office, behind a painting of ships on a stormy sea that had cost him $40,000 at auction, was a wall safe. Inside that safe were 2 things that represented his only chance at freedom: a passport, his real passport, with his real name, not one of the fakes he had considered getting but never quite had the courage to arrange, and an encrypted hard drive containing access codes to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, where he had been slowly, carefully siphoning money for the past 3 years. $12 million that no one knew about, that wasn't on any official books, that could let him disappear to a country without extradition treaties and live comfortably while his empire burned behind him. He had a ticket to Mexico City booked for 5 o'clock that evening, a connection from there to Panama, and then a private boat that would take him somewhere the American government couldn't reach. But all of that depended on getting inside his house, getting to that safe, and getting out before anyone realized he was back in the country. He had told everyone at the office yesterday that he was flying to London for an emergency meeting with investors. Instead, he had driven 8 hours through back roads, paying cash for gas, avoiding toll cameras, acting like a criminal, because that's exactly what he was.
And now Rosa, his maid, the woman he paid $11 an hour to clean his toilets and wash his sheets and serve him coffee while he barely looked up from his phone, was telling him he couldn't come into his own home. The absurdity of it made him want to laugh, except nothing was funny anymore. Rosa, I pay your salary. I own this house. I own this entire street practically. Now open this door before I break it down and have you deported. The threat hung in the air. Rosa was from Guatemala. He knew that much, though he had never bothered to ask about her story or her family or whether she was documented. It was the kind of threat he had made casually before, the kind of power he wielded without thinking because he had always had power over people like her. But Rosa didn't step back. Instead, she said, "The police are already here, sir. I tried to warn you outside. I tried to save you from the shame." And that's when Victor heard it, the sound that made his blood turn to ice in his veins. Footsteps. Heavy footsteps coming from inside his house, from his living room. Footsteps that didn't belong there. He didn't think. He just moved. Victor slammed his shoulder into the door, and Rosa, all 110 pounds of her, stumbled backward and fell onto the marble floor of the entrance hall. He stepped over her without looking back, without helping her up, focused only on getting to the office, getting to the safe, getting out. But as he moved through the entrance hall, something felt wrong. The space looked different, emptier. The massive Chinese vase that usually stood by the staircase was gone. The Persian rug that had cost $18,000 was missing, leaving bare marble. The paintings on the walls had been replaced by rectangular shadows where they used to hang. "Where are my things?" Victor spun around to face Rosa, who was getting to her feet, brushing off her uniform with a dignity that somehow made him feel smaller. "Did you rob me? Did you steal from me?"
"I'm calling the police right now." He reached for his phone, but Rosa's voice stopped him. "The police were already here, sir. I told you. I tried to warn you." She wasn't yelling, wasn't crying, wasn't showing any emotion, except perhaps a deep sadness. "The police came at 9 this morning. They asked me to let them in. I had no choice but to cooperate." Victor felt reality tilting sideways. "What are you talking about? What police?" But even as he asked, he was moving toward the living room, toward those footsteps he had heard, some part of his brain still refusing to accept what was happening. He rounded the corner into the vast living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the pool, and there they were. 3 men in suits, sitting on his white leather sofa, which had been covered with plastic sheeting like this was a crime scene, which he supposed it was. 2 of the men had the unmistakable look of federal agents, that squared-away appearance, those calculating eyes. The third was older, holding a briefcase, probably a lawyer or court official. They all looked up as Victor entered, and none of them seemed surprised to see him. "Mr. Victor Vance?" The older man stood, pulling a document from his briefcase. "I'm Officer Daniels from the district court. This property was seized at 9 o'clock this morning as part of the federal investigation into Vance Capital Management and associated fraud charges. All assets have been frozen pending trial. The locks were changed at noon. You are currently in violation of a court order by being on these premises." Victor felt like he was watching this happen to someone else, like he was floating above his body, observing a scene from someone else's nightmare. "This is my house. I bought this house. I paid for everything in this house. My name is on the deed." Officer Daniels nodded slowly. "Your name was on the deed.
As of 9 this morning, this property is under federal control.
Everything in this residence has been cataloged and will be sold at auction to repay the investors you defrauded. You need to leave immediately, or you will be arrested for trespassing in addition to your other charges. But Victor wasn't looking at Officer Daniels anymore. He was looking at Rosa, who had followed him into the living room and now stood by the doorway with her hands folded in front of her. You knew. You knew about this, and you just let me walk in here? You could have called me, warned me, but you just stood there and watched me make a fool of myself? Rosa's expression didn't change. I did warn you, Mr. Victor. At the door. I told you that you were trespassing. I told you to leave. You didn't listen. You never listen. The words were simple, but they hit like hammer blows. Victor felt something rising in his chest, panic or rage, or the beginning of understanding that his entire life had just ended while he wasn't paying attention. No, this isn't happening. I need to get something from my office. I need 5 minutes, just 5 minutes, and then I'll leave. He started moving toward the hallway that led to his private office, but one of the federal agents stood up, his hand moving subtly toward his belt, where Victor knew a gun must be holstered. Sir, you need to stop moving. And listen carefully. You are not allowed to take anything from this property. If you attempt to enter any other rooms or remove any items, you will be placed under arrest immediately. Do you understand? But Victor had already spent 3 days running from reality, 3 days in a state of panic and denial, and he wasn't ready to stop running yet. In his mind, there was still a chance, still a possibility that if he could just get to that safe, get that hard drive and passport, he could escape this moment and reinvent himself somewhere far away, where none of this had happened yet.
He bolted, just turned and ran down the hallway toward his office, while behind him he heard shouting and footsteps pounding after him. His office door was open. He noticed that as he ran through it, open when he always kept it locked. Inside, everything looked wrong, ransacked, his desk drawers open, filing cabinets pulled out, books knocked from shelves. But Victor didn't care about any of that. He went straight to the wall where the painting of ships hung, grabbed the frame, and tore it down. The safe was there, built into the wall, the digital lock that only he knew the combination to. Except the safe door was hanging open. The safe was empty. Victor reached inside like his hands might find something his eyes couldn't see, but there was nothing, just bare metal. Behind him, someone cleared their throat. He turned to find one of the federal agents standing in the doorway, holding a clear evidence bag. Inside that bag, Victor could see his passport, his blue American passport with the gold eagle, and beneath it, a small black hard drive. Looking for these? The agent held up the bag. We found them at approximately 9:45 this morning, right where Mrs. Rosa Martinez told us they would be. She gave us the exact location of this safe and informed us that you had mentioned in a phone conversation yesterday, which she overheard, that you planned to return home today to retrieve these items before fleeing the country. That information allowed us to expedite the seizure order and be here waiting for you. Victor's legs felt weak. He grabbed the edge of his desk to steady himself, his mind trying and failing to process what he was hearing. You betrayed me. He wasn't even looking at the agent anymore. He was looking past him to where Rosa stood in the hallway, still calm, still composed. After everything I did for you, after I gave you a job, you betrayed me to the police.
Rosa stepped into the office, and for the first time since Victor had arrived home, her expression changed, not to sadness or anger, but to something harder, something that had been building for a very long time. I didn't betray you, Mr. Victor. I stopped you from stealing more money from people who trusted you. For 10 years I worked in this house. For 10 years I cleaned your rooms and served your food and listened to you talk on the phone in front of me, like I wasn't even there, like I was furniture, like I was deaf and blind and had no thoughts in my head. You talked about your deals, your schemes, your fake numbers. You laughed about old people who gave you their retirement savings because they believed you were making them rich. You celebrated every time you tricked someone new. And I said nothing because I needed this job, because I have a daughter in college and a mother who needs medicine, because people like you have all the power
and people like me have none. But 3 days ago, when those agents came to my door and asked if I knew anything, I realized I had a choice. I could keep being invisible and let you escape to some island while families lose everything. Or I could finally be seen. I chose to be seen. The room was silent except for the sound of Victor's breathing, fast and shallow. Everything you heard, everything I said in private, you had no right to spy on me. You had no right to tell anyone. Rosa shook her head slowly. You had no right to steal from people, Mr. Victor. I didn't spy. You talked in front of me. You spoke secrets while I vacuumed. You celebrated fraud while I served you dinner. You treated me like I didn't exist, so you have no one to blame but yourself when the invisible woman remembered everything.
Victor felt the room spinning. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't how his story was supposed to end. He was supposed to be the clever one, the one who always found the angle, the escape route, the way to win. He looked at the agent holding his passport and hard drive, the only thing standing between him and freedom, now sealed in an evidence bag forever. What happens now? His voice came out as a whisper. The agent exchanged glances with his partner. Victor Vance, you are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and attempting to flee prosecution. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The handcuffs were cold against his wrists. Victor let them put the cuffs on without resisting, let them read him his rights without protesting. Because somewhere in the part of his brain that was still functioning, he understood that this was over. Truly over. That no amount of talking or charm or threats could change what was happening. They walked him back through the house, through the living room where Officer Daniels was packing up his briefcase, through the entrance hall where that expensive Chinese vase used to stand, toward the front door that Rosa held open for them. Outside, the day was bright and cruel. The entire neighborhood seemed to be out on their lawns and porches. His neighbors, who had always smiled and waved at him, who had admired his success, who had probably envied his wealth. Now they all stood watching as Victor Vance, financial genius, was led in handcuffs to an unmarked sedan. He could see phones out, people recording video, and he knew that by tonight, his face would be all over social media and the news. His humiliation broadcast to the world.
Before you go, before you judge what happened here, let me ask you something. Have you ever worked for someone who treated you like you were invisible? Have you ever watched someone break the rules and get away with it because they had money or power or connections? Leave a comment below and tell me about it, because these stories matter. These moments when the invisible become visible, when the powerless find their power, these are the stories we need to hear. And if you believe that justice matters more than wealth, if you think people like Rosa deserve to have their voices heard, then subscribe to Money Stories That Matter, because we're going to keep telling these stories as long as they keep happening. Victor sat in the back of the federal sedan, watching his mansion disappear in the side mirror, and thought about all the choices that had led him here. He thought about the first time he had fudged numbers on a report, telling himself it was just temporary, just until the next quarter when real profits would come. He thought about the second time and the 10th and the 100th, until lying had become easier than telling the truth. He thought about all the people whose faces he had never really looked at, the assistants and maids and drivers who had been part of his daily life, but whom he had never seen as fully human, as people with their own agency and intelligence and moral codes. He had thought that being rich made him invisible to consequences, that money was a shield against accountability. But he had been wrong. The people he thought were invisible had been watching him all along. And in the end, it wasn't the FBI or the auditors or the investors who had brought him down. It was Rosa, standing in a doorway, finally refusing to step aside.
Back at the house, Officer Daniels finished his paperwork and approached Rosa, who was standing in the entrance hall, looking tired but steady. Mrs. Martinez, on behalf of the court, I want to thank you for your cooperation in this investigation. Your testimony and evidence will be crucial to the prosecution's case.
As discussed, you are permitted to remain in the guest house on the property until the estate sale is finalized, approximately 3 months. After that, we can help connect you with organizations that assist witnesses in finding new employment. He handed her an envelope. This contains a stipend for your assistance and contact information for the Witness Protection Program if you feel you need it, though we don't anticipate any threats in this case. Rosa took the envelope, but didn't open it. She looked around the grand entrance hall one more time. At the marble floors she had mopped 1,000 times. At the crystal chandelier she had cleaned monthly, standing on a ladder, while Victor walked past without acknowledging her presence. Officer Daniels, I don't need protection. I need to know that the people he stole from will get their money back. Can you promise me that? Officer Daniels sighed. I can promise we'll do everything in our power to recover assets and return them to victims. It won't be everything. It never is in these cases, but it will be something. That seemed to satisfy Rosa. She nodded and walked the officers to the door, watching as their cars pulled away, leaving her alone in a house that had never really been a home, just a stage where a terrible performance had played out over years.
Rosa locked the door with the new key they had given her, the key that Victor's golden key could no longer open, and walked through the silent rooms. She thought about her daughter Maria studying engineering at State College, about her mother back in Guatemala who called every Sunday to tell her to come home, to stop working for rich Americans who didn't appreciate her. She thought about the moment 3 days ago when the FBI agents had shown up at her door with questions about Victor Vance, and how her hands had shaken as she decided whether to tell them what she knew. It would have been easier to say nothing, to plead ignorance, to protect the man who signed her paychecks. But Rosa had watched too many news stories about elderly couples losing their homes, about teachers who lost their pensions, about ordinary people whose lives were destroyed by men like Victor, who treated the economy like a casino where only they knew the odds were rigged. And she had thought about what she would want someone to do if it was her mother's savings that Victor was stealing, if it was Maria's college fund that disappeared into his Ponzi scheme. She would want someone to speak up. So she had spoken. And now, Victor was gone. And Rosa was still here, standing in an empty mansion that would soon belong to someone else, probably someone just as rich and just as careless about the people who cleaned their toilets and cooked their food. But for these 3 months, until the house was sold, Rosa had something she had never had before. She had a space of her own, the guest house that was bigger than any apartment she had ever rented. She had silence without anyone yelling orders. She had time to think about what came next. And she had the knowledge that when the moment came, when she was asked to choose between her own survival and doing the right thing, she had chosen correctly. That knowledge was worth more than any amount of money Victor could have paid her.
The story of Victor Vance and Rosa Martinez spread quickly through the news cycle. The man who lost everything featured interviews with his victims, elderly couples who had trusted him with their life savings, young families who had given him money meant for their children's education, all of them sharing this same story of a charming man who had promised guaranteed returns and delivered only empty accounts. Some reporters painted Rosa as a hero, the brave whistleblower who brought down a con man. Others questioned her motives, suggested she had ulterior reasons for cooperating with authorities. But Rosa didn't read the articles or watch the news segments about her. She had already spent too many years of her life defined by Victor's narrative, by his version of who she was and what she was worth. Now she was writing her own story, and it didn't require anyone's approval or validation. Before we end this story, I want you to think about something. In your own life, who are the invisible people? Who are the workers and helpers and service providers that you pass every day without really seeing? And more importantly, what would they say about you if someone asked them? These aren't comfortable questions, but they're necessary ones. Because the truth is that we're all being observed by the people we think aren't paying attention. Our character isn't what we show to people we respect or fear. It's what we show to people we think don't matter. And if that thought bothers you, if it makes you uncomfortable,
then maybe it's time to change how you treat the people around you. Subscribe to Money Stories That Matter if you want to hear more stories about wealth, power, and the moments when everything changes. Because money isn't just about numbers in a bank account. It's about the relationships we build, the choices we make, and the person we become when we think no one important is watching.
Victor Vance was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to 47 counts of fraud. The assets recovered from his estate returned approximately 30 cents on the dollar to his victims, which meant that most of them lost the majority of their investments. His mansion sold at auction to a tech entrepreneur from California who promised to treat it with respect and who, according to later reports, hired Rosa to manage the property if she wanted the position. Rosa declined. She used her daughter's graduation from college as a moment to make her own change. She enrolled in a community college program for paralegal studies, inspired by her experience working with prosecutors on Victor's case. She wanted to understand the law, to be able to help other people navigate systems that seemed designed to protect the powerful and ignore the powerless. 3 years after Victor went to prison, Rosa passed her certification exam and took a job at a nonprofit legal aid organization, helping immigrants understand their rights and fight for fair treatment in a system that often seems stacked against them. She never became wealthy. She never owned a mansion or drove an expensive car. But every night when she came home to her small apartment, she could look in the mirror and recognize the person looking back at her. And that, she decided, was worth more than all the golden keys in the world. This is Money Stories That Matter, where we tell you the truth about wealth and power and the people caught between them. Thanks for watching, and remember that every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. So be kind, be fair, and never assume that someone is less important just because they have less money. The invisible people are always watching, always listening, and always remembering. And someday, when you least expect it, they might be the ones who determine your fate.